So welcome everyone to our October monthly dialogue. I'm glad that everybody is joining us this morning, this evening, nighttime. We have everybody from all corners of the world today, which is very, very exciting. Love being all on one call at the same time. But so just a little background about our monthly dialogues in case you have not been on one yet or it's been a while, but these are geared towards dialogue, conversation, collaboration between members. We used to have monthly webinars that we call them, but I think it's been 2 years now that we transitioned to this dialogue format just to encourage more connection between members, some collaboration, some even maybe some mentorship to learn about a particular topic, a particular subject, learn from people who are maybe working more heavily on that topic and kind of just have some dialogue between members about it. So this is hopefully an active participation time for people. So feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand on Zoom, write in the chat. We will definitely have time for everybody to be able to participate. So that's kind of what the point of these are. But I do want to note that you probably saw this notification as you came in, but we are recording these dialogues just for the people, our GAHTS members who are not able to join us live, whether it's time zone or another meeting that they have, that they're still able to listen in and take part of the conversation. I do want to note though that it is only for our GAHTS Scholar members, so not even our advocates, just our community of GAHTS Scholar members. So I do want this to be a space where you do feel comfortable sharing or asking questions, that, you know, though it is recorded, it is only within our GAHTS community. If there is a question that you do want to ask that maybe you don't want to identify your name with it, you can personal message me on chat. So if you're in chat and you click on the to field and you just send it to me, that's a private message and I can read that question, pose that question to the group without identifying your name. So I do want to give you that ability. But so I think that's all of the little like housekeeping things. But so today we are going to be focusing on a new topic of interest, which is addressing demand, consumers, and the supply chain. We have 2 of our GAHTS senior research scholars, Matthew Clark and Glenn Miles, on with us. We were also supposed to have senior scholar Marcel Vanderwatt, but he unfortunately had a fire in his apartment that did not affect his personal unit, but there was a lot of smoke damage. He was trying to join this morning and we told him, no, take care of yourself. This is the last thing on your mind. But he has also worked a lot in this area. And so we're going to probably like briefly mention his work, but if you do want to reach out to him or have further questions, I'll probably put his email in the chat as he is a great resource on this topic. But I'm going to give it over to Matt and Glenn and maybe just introduce yourself, who you are, and maybe a little bit about what you do first, just for everybody to kind of know you, and then we can kind of get into the topic a little bit more. So Matt, I will hand it to you first.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Anna. And I don't know most of the people on the screen. I've seen a few faces. Not sure if you've seen me with some one-directional sort of thing when I haven't interacted with you, but welcome everybody. I'm on the outskirts of Sydney, well, a couple of hours south of Sydney in Australia, and so I normally don't join these groups because it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and but I thought, oh well, sometimes I'll come here. Here I am. I've been working in the anti-trafficking space for about 6 or 7 years. And if you know anything about me, you'll have heard me talk about how important it is for us to understand and engage with perpetrators if we want to actually change the whole system that supports human trafficking. So that's me, Glenn.
Yeah, hi. I'm also I'm from another place too. I'm from Wales in the UK. And so it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon for me, so not quite as bad as Matt. And I just wanted to say to Anna, last month's dialogue, there was a hurricane and somebody wasn't able to do it this month. It was a fire. So you better warn the people from next month that it
I
might be
know.
flooding.
If I've
That's
contacted
great.
you about a future dialogue, I'm sorry. I'm hoping there is no GAHTS dialogue curse, that it's just some freak things and it has nothing to do with
You get invited
us.
and you have 7 days to live,
I
basically.
But no, this is an important topic, and I think I remember talking with someone who was working in the trafficking space and particularly concerned for survivors, and they said to me that they felt like they were just dealing with the aftermath, and that every time someone they helped with one person, then another person will be brought in. So it was like, how do we stop the process of people being trafficked? It's a complicated one, and we certainly not the authorities on it, but we want to tell you about some of the things that we've tried and we're hoping to try. So we're looking forward to doing that today.
Yeah. And it's a shame that Marcel couldn't join us. I'm not sure how well you know him or his work. Marcel's originally South African. He was part of the South African police force, and then later a researcher and lecturer at the University of South Africa. And then about maybe 3 years ago, he moved to the US, where he works as a researcher with the National Centre on Sexual Exploitation. And yeah, it's sad that we can't hear his perspective today, but we all wish him well, I'm sure. Now, I'm just going to share my own screen for a little while. But while I'm doing that, before I do that, I wonder if what thinking that you've already done on this topic, and maybe in the chat box, you might all write just a couple of words if you can think of something. What do you think is likely to be an effective strategy to reduce the demand for human trafficking or modern slavery? What do you think might be an effective strategy? Or any experiences you've got? Maybe just type a couple of words in the chat box and we can see what sort of ideas people come to this meeting with before you get biased by what Glenn and I might say. And while you're thinking about that, I'll share my screen.
And then Matt, I don't know now that you're sharing your screen if you can see the chat, but I can read out some of them if that would be helpful.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't thought that I couldn't see the chat. There you go.
You should be, it's just a little more tricky.
Oh, there it is. Sure, I can see it at the top of the screen. Yep.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. That's fine. So yeah, public shaming, trafficking laws, family dysfunction, emotional wounds, trauma, understanding motives. So there's a variety of things that we've tried to do over the last 20 years or so as a movement, some of which has been rescuing victims and some of which has been prosecuting the perpetrators. But some has certainly been in this angle of trying to reduce the demand side, not just changing the supply side. What do you think has been the most effective strategies on that demand side? Seizing assets.
Yeah, that's interesting. You've got seizing assets, trafficking laws, public shaming. Public shaming, I would think that would be fairly effective, getting it out onto, getting it into newspapers or other places.
Yeah. Right. Well, keep typing some ideas there, and I'll jump forward a couple of slides. The outline of what we're wanting to do here is that Glenn and I will each talk for about 5 minutes, just introducing some ideas. But then we want to spend as much time as possible in open discussion. So we'll turn to that as soon as we can. And we'll talk for 30 minutes or so and see where the conversation goes. But at the end of that, we'll have a a sort of a wrap-up time where everybody just gets to say a brief sentence, just 30 seconds worth about what you consider to be the main takeaways, the main ideas that you picked up from the previous discussion. And then Glenn and I'll say a couple of words right at the end just to round things off. So that's where we're going. Oops. My next slide here is just some ways to contact me if you want to see the background to my thinking. Our website's Turning Teardrops into Joy. That's a small sustainable social enterprise and charity group that my wife and I run. And I'm leading what's called the Freedom Keys Research Project. We do have a YouTube channel with some of my past lectures and other odds and ends on it. And feel free to email me at the address there if you're interested in further contacts. Now let's just jump back to the chat there. Any other suggestions? John schools? Yep, not sure how successful they are. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. Treating perps like people, while also not neglecting their responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. Somehow a personal engagement. Okay, so I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of what I think the types of strategies that are possible in this space. So the core question for me is, how do you change consumer demand? How do you change consumer behaviours that cause the demand for coerced, abused goods and services? And it seems to me that there's two general approaches. One's the top-down pressures from governments and public policy and the United Nations and things like that. And the other is a bottom-up approach where we try to get a groundswell of public support and peer pressure. So the top-down approaches come through legislation, public policy, perhaps codes of conduct, industry by industry, a variety of things that we could be doing there. And then the bottom-up is somehow trying to mobilize people around this shared idea. Ethical purchasing, how do we promote the idea that people have the ability through their purchasing power to have some influence over where the goods and services come from? Now, of course, the pressures here on both sides depend a little bit about what type of human trafficking we're trying to influence. If it's something where there's a direct relationship between the consumer and the coerced person, for instance, in a sex trafficking situation, well, the strategies are going to be a bit different than if it's something like buying a T-shirt that comes from a sweatshop where someone's labour is being extremely exploited and where they don't have the freedom to leave. But the two angles still work, that there's a legislative top-down approach, and then there's this peer pressure, group mobilisation from the bottom up. Let's just have a little bit of a look at those two sides in a little bit more detail. How would a top-down strategy operate? Well, one of the things that you could be doing is to somehow legislatively, from the top down, remove the choice. Stop making it possible for people to do the thing that leads to someone's abuse or exploitation. Make it illegal. Add sales conditions. In Australia, on a different sort of issue, if you want to buy cigarettes, you still can, but cigarettes have to be under the counter. They're not allowed to be on public display, and they've got to be in plain paper without any advertising on it, and they have to contain warnings on the packaging about the likely outcome of cancer. Now, that type of thing, conditions of sale could be put on slave-produced goods and services. International trade restrictions could make a certain product unavailable because the government has outlawed its import. Secondly, you could do something to change the price structure. You could use tariffs and taxes to increase the price of slave-produced goods and services so that they're no longer affordable or no longer interesting to the customers because of the extreme cost. I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens in Australia with supply chain auditing. Australia federally and also the state that I live in, New South Wales, both have legislation that try to force large companies to audit their supply chains. They do a similar sort of thing in the UK, and the Australian legislation is somewhat based on the UK legislation. So any company in Australia whose revenue is greater than $50 million has to produce an annual report that gets submitted to a public body and put on their website, so it's made public, that says what they have done within their own staff, within their own employment, to ensure that nobody is being exploited and that everyone has safe jobs, they're being paid what they should be paid, etc. And also they need to report on the relationship with their suppliers. And so the idea here is that the benefit will ripple out. You force the large companies to do an annual report, and that will cause them to ask all of their suppliers whether there's any exploitation in the suppliers' employment contracts. And then they might say to their suppliers, next time we renew the contract, we're not going to renew the contract unless you can assure us that no one in your organisation is being exploited. So the idea is that a ripple out effect over multiple years will push down the assurance through the supply chain. One of the problems with the Australian legislation is that if you don't submit that report, there's no penalty. It's compulsory, but there's no penalty if you don't do it. And of course, people can just submit a one-page thing without any real consideration. And what they say in the report, there's no dictated things that have to be included. And how do you audit those things anyway? So there's challenges with that, but at least it's an idea that's being attempted here in Australia. The last thing I want to talk about on the top-down strategy is the threat of punishment. Not only can we make something illegal, but we can tell people that if they do it, we're going to put them in jail or fine them severely or confiscate their assets or something. And, well, we can talk later about how that's effective and in what circumstances it might be effective. But there we go. The next thing, just a couple of words about bottom-up strategies, and then I'll hand over to Glenn. The bottom-up strategies, remember, are about mobilising people. And so one of the ways we could do that is make people aware of the continuing problem of human trafficking and their contribution to it. Even sex buyers might not be fully aware of the consequences, the impact of their behaviours on the people that they're coercing into sex. But that's even more the case when someone's buying a T-shirt from the local supermarket at a very cheap price. So they might actually not be aware that someone's being exploited to make that T-shirt so cheap for them. So making people aware is an important bottom-up strategy. Giving them easily accessible information online, in schools. I'll mention in a second some ethical scorecards for particular product categories. It could be that you confront people at the point of sale. You could be walking the streets, as Glenn can tell us about, and intercepting sex buyers and having a chat to them about whether they really know what's going on. Of course, they may have willful ignorance as well. That's more difficult to get by. They might have all sorts of rationalizations for what they do. But at least for some people, just increasing the knowledge can make a difference. The second is making them care. They might know things but not give a damn. So how do we make them care? How do we help them feel responsible? How do we develop their empathy for the people that they are abusing, coercing, or exploiting? Then I wanted to say something about ethical purchasing guides. It's extremely difficult, virtually impossible for individuals in this world to determine whether a product is ethically sourced or not. And it's even difficult for some people out on their tourist holiday to think whether the girls that are roaming the street are there by choice. They look happy enough. Goodness me, I'm giving them some money. If I wasn't doing it, they'd be out of a job. There are all of these sort of rationalizations that underlying them is this lack of empathy for the damage that they are doing. So how do we increase that desire to care for the people around us and people who are lower down in the supply chain? It's virtually impossible to do that alone. And yet we could do it communally. And there are 3 examples there that I've given. The Australian organisation Be Slavery Free produces an annual chocolate scorecard. And so chocolate retailers, manufacturers are given a score based on, including amongst other things, the appropriate use of labour contracts. Baptist World Aid in Australia has a similar sort of thing with their ethical fashion guide. And in the UK, there's a group called Ethical Consumer, and they have a whole series of ratings for organisations across multiple industries that includes a rating system for the treatment of workers. So there's a variety of possibilities there. And with that, I will stop my sharing. So that's how I see the overall picture, and we can have discussions as we go about the details of any of those. Okay, Glenn, do you want to take over for a while?
Really helpful. Thank you for giving that overview. That was excellent. I'm just looking at some of the comments on the side. I like the thing that Nili says in Israel, where 2 students distributed business cards seemingly of people trading sex, but the QR code on them led to a website about the harms of the sex trade. That was similar. I think that was probably copied from something that was done in Oxford with a group there. And they, one of the things that it was known in the UK, the way they used to advertise was in phone boxes. So they would put postcard size postcards up in the inside of the phone box with the telephone number of the sex worker, and then that was how people, found out who was what and where they were. Then there's certain free magazines and things. So that were it's quite challenging, but going to them and saying, please don't, please, stop from allowing people to put advertisements about sex buying on your newspaper because it's harmful. If enough people do that, then they have to take notice. So it's looking for opportunities like that. Well, then it becomes more difficult for people. People have to dig harder to find it, rather than just going to a phone box and then thinking, oh yeah, that would be good, I'll do that. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just a little bit too easy. And I think around Easter time, when everyone's stuffing themselves with chocolate, the chocolate scorecard was a good thing to be sending out through Facebook and getting people to do that. I like what Jarrett put about treating perps like people, and I've been working with. I'm on the board of an organisation in Luton, near London, in the UK, and it's called the. It started from an organisation that do support of women in the sex trade called Azalea, and they have a small group of men who have chosen to get into trying to reach out to men. In fact, it's been quite a complicated process. They've had they really wanted to do it to help, but trying to actually get men to connect with them has been quite difficult. So there's different things. There was talk about talking to men who've in the jails who are there as sex perpetrators, but that's not really prevention. And so now they've started a program where they do counselling of men who are sex buyers but who want to get out. And most of the men that they've spoken to so far are Christians, so they have a moral obligation to take notice of this and do something about it. So that's good. But they're now doing training of other people in the country and indeed around the world that are interested in developing a program like this. So do contact me if you're interested in that training program. It's basically the way that the training program works is it's training of people who are doing the counselling, but it's a very much a positive take on counselling. So it's rather than looking for the problems, it's looking for the strengths that these people have that they can use in order to try and stop the addiction of the sex addiction. Now I know that's quite controversial, and I think a better term might be out of control sexual behaviour, but it's still it's used. The other thing, of course, is that if you take a backward step with all of that, we know that that pornography is massive in it's a bit, for me, it's a bit like the cigarette, the tobacco industry. For years we knew that tobacco caused cancer, but we couldn't do much about it because the tobacco companies had the lawyers on their side. And I feel like that's pretty much where we're at with the sex trade now, and pornography. The harm of it, in the way that, for example, I think I understand that about 50% of marriage divorces now cite pornography as being one of the causes. So that's a pretty high amount. And of course, pornography. We did a research in Cambodia, and one of the boys' comments, which we used as the title of the research, was, "I see it, so I want to do it." It's quite. That's where we're at. And so the way that people see their bodies, the way that they want to buy sex, is because it's what they see in pornography, and that's what they expect. So we know that pornography is a drive to using other people, to buying people and what they expect of them. Yeah, so I'm really excited to see how that program develops. There is a group that was started by the Mennonite who do it's called Circles of Trust, and it's basically they provide support for men who have come out of jail, who are sex offenders, and it's basically a weekly meetup with them. And again, it's the very positive perspective. They don't dig into what they're thinking or doing. It's just a support group. And they found that the recidivism rate, so in meaning them going back to do what they did before, is very low as a result of this program. So that's evidence-based. So that's really impressive. And because I think, the normal situation is that they're on the sex offenders register, they're ostracized and pushed out. And then, of course, they don't have any positive relationships in their life, and then they're more likely to go back to doing what they've done before. So that's with that. Another way, in terms of another bottom-up idea, is to actually train people and talk to them, to warn them about the issue. So this is a flip book that I've developed. This has been used in Asia now, and I'm in discussions about use. It's been used in Cambodia, and I've got in discussions this week about using it in the Philippines. But it's also I basically think, that whole idea of lover boy, what's it called, grooming, the lover boy grooming. So it's a girl meets a boy outside the school gates, and he seems really cute, and she's a bit shy, and he woos her, and then before she knows it, he's having sex with her, and then very quickly afterwards, it's leading to him being basically exploiting her and passing her on to other men, and so on. So that's we know that that's common and happens around the world, and we know that in the UK, we're aware that where we are aware of it is where children are in homes where where they can't be adopted or fostered, and so they're the ones kind of left over, and those children are the ones that are particularly vulnerable to being trafficked, because they're desperately looking for companionship, for love, so anyway, so there needs to be particular focus on where children are most vulnerable, and I would suggest that might be in inner city areas. In New York, they've had one program that have worked, that I'm aware of, with a group called Unitas, was it Jared? Is it Unicas or Unitas?
Unitas, yeah.
Yeah, and they did both education of teenage or high school children that was aimed at the victims, but also aimed at the perpetrators. So that, you know, they also they were understanding that some of the children might end up being perps, might end up being the madams. Maybe it's not immediate, but it's still possible that they could be involved in grooming. Older children could be involved in grooming younger children. And in the UK at the moment, we have a thing called county lines. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but it's where children are used to transport drugs that they from one place to another, and it can be, apparently it's as young as 7 years old, and they have the situation where children are taken, they're given those electric scooters, and so that they can get around with those. They're given those on the condition that they sell the drugs, or they not sell them, but they pass on the drugs to wherever it needs to go. And then of course they're vulnerable to other things as well, and including being sexually exploited. So that's another group that we want to we could target. So I have got another thing here. It's like a poster. It's a bit I'll try and show it to you. It was another thing that we did in Cambodia. I don't know whether you can see it. So basically what it is we use this as a training tool with the army and the police. Now, one of the challenges in the UK and in anywhere actually is that how do you get to connect with men? You know, with women, there's women's groups, all sorts of women's groups all over the place. With men, not so much. There are a few, but not so much. But where men are with the army, in army groups, and with the police. So if you can get access to teach groups of policemen or groups in the army or other military units, then you can do training with them. And this training was really all about the choices that men have. You can either choose to use prostitutes or you can choose not to use it. And these are the advantages of using it, and these are the disadvantages. So it's looking at the very real issues. You know, they can be, all their friends can tell them all the great things about you know, buying sex, but then they need to think about the not so good stuff about it, and they need to think about the impact that it's having on other people. And as it was said by Matthew earlier, I was involved with a group in Cambodia where we went around the red light areas, and we would stop men, especially men that were on their own, or we would sit down at a table where they were having a beer and just talk to them about the situation and give them an alternative perspective. This program was going for 10 years. It was called Guys Like Us. It was based from a Christian perspective, but it wasn't, there was no, no Bible bashing, but it was a way of connecting with men and saying to them, you know, you maybe you're better than this, you know, and these are girls, however you like to try and tell yourself that it's okay. You know, you're talking about girls who are desperate, and the reason they're doing it is because they don't have any other choice. Now I know that may be seen as controversial by some, but we did it, and it was one of those situations where if someone gives you the middle finger, then you might actually be having an impact in them. Because you know they're actually they recognize that maybe you've touched something in their heart that says, hang on a minute, that's not good. So I think that it's worth a try, and I think we need to think about creative ways to connect with men, believing that it's possible. Now,
Yeah, well, thank you.
uh,
I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to make sure that we do have time for either questions or
of course, yeah, of
discussion.
course.
About 20 or so minutes left. So great information from both of you, a lot to digest. So kind of, I don't know if you had specific questions, but first kind of just want to open it up if people have comments or thoughts or have worked in demand or supply chain or, you know, reduction and have anything that they want to share or any questions for Matthew or Glenn based on what we have already talked about. Yeah, Courtney.
I have a question or a comment. Someone mentioned the ethical guides around supply chains. And I think those guides are useful if we can get people to read them. How does that work?
Yeah, that's a challenge. A lot of work goes into producing those. But how do you get the word out? And of course, people are only likely to read it if they come with a predisposition to wanting to do the right thing. So there's a bit of groundwork to be done to start with, to raise people's, to conscientize people to realize that there might be a problem here that they need extra information for, and then they will go looking for the guides. So yeah, I mean, the guides can be spread around online and in doctors' waiting rooms and in schools and all over the places. But you also have to do some marketing work to increase people's appetite for that kind of material. That's not a trivial task.
The other thing is that fair trade goods that are bought where people are getting a good, you know, that they are purchasing products which there is a link to of how it was bought to ensure that it's safe and good, and people haven't been exploited. The problem with that is it's more expensive, because if you're exploiting people, then usually the product is cheaper. So it means that people have to be prepared to pay a little bit more because the product is going to be, you know, properly screened. So that's a disadvantage. But if people understand that people are being exploited, maybe some of them will be challenged to pay that little bit more.
Fair trade is also, just a quick comment, fair trade works best for short supply chains when you're buying, for example, an agricultural product, chocolate, coffee, something like this. Cocaine, no, I'm joking. But when you're buying an agricultural product directly, when you have these short supply chains, okay, maybe it's cocoa to manufacturer to, you know, retailer, but longer supply chains, it's much more difficult.
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that you had put that in the chat with like batteries and electrical cars. And so that longer supply chain, and then consumers not knowing, or even some of the manufacturers not knowing where all of the products are coming from. I think that makes
And of course that can be addressed. It's just that it's a different sort of thing. You're not going to talk to a consumer about, oh, you have to watch out for this car, because nobody knows. You have to deal with manufacturers, and they can investigate their own supply chains. But for the agricultural products like chocolate, I can remember speaking at a human trafficking conference, and all the presenters were given a very nice thank you card and a bar of fair trade chocolate. So it works really good for short supply chains. A different strategy is needed for longer ones.
Yeah,
it's almost like they need research to map that out, like what does the different steps of that supply chain process look like for different industries, segmented into all the different producers and subcontractors. And like, that sounds like something that's really needed.
Courtney, can you your turn?
Thanks, Glenn. Off the topic of supply chains. Yes, off the topic of supply chains. So I want to say that I don't agree with public shaming and seizing assets.
Okay.
Oh no, we lost you again.
Darn it.
She was having some
Just
internet
asked
issues.
what has.
There we go.
Why is it every time that I talk that my
I wonder if
internet
doing this yesterday? I don't know what.
I know. I wonder if you turned
Literally-
your camera off, if that's because we can hear you now. You're better now, but so
Go for
you
it.
said
Go
you
for it.
didn't. We heard you didn't agree with public shaming and seizing assets, and then it froze. But if you want to keep
Yes.
going.
I'm telling you. Okay, so yeah, I don't agree with that, but you did ask what has worked in the past, and statistics have suggested that those types of public shaming things, or things where the perpetrators' lives, something interferes with their lives, that has worked. But I do think that there are ways that we can rehumanize buyers in our efforts to decrease demand. So I'm really a novice when it comes to researching perpetrator behavior, but I am working on a project that I thought y'all might be interested in called Transaction Intercept. And Transaction Intercept was created by Street Grace, who I work with as the director of research, in partnership with Microsoft. And it uses AI generated images in an AI chatbot to chat with potential buyers that are looking to purchase sex through websites. And so the chatbot doesn't contact the buyer contacts the chatbot, and there's some chatting that goes on. This is a tool for law enforcement, and law enforcement can then take over the chat if they want to, or we just log those data. And we've already, it's just now really launching. It's brand new, but we've already engaged with thousands of potential buyers. And so it'll be really interesting to get to analyze those data, both qualitatively and quantitatively. I don't really know what that's going to look like. That's kind of a big big black box for me right now, but we will see, and it's exciting. So maybe you'll hear more about Transaction Intercept in the future.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And then Nicole, were you saying that you were interested in what Courtney was saying, or? Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So Courtney, if you want to put your contact information in the chat, or if there's any links to that. So if people want to either reach out to you or about that. I know we've got a couple more. So Neely, I saw your hand was raised next, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering if you can speak about which strategies are more effective to curb demand, if it's the top-down or bottom-up ones. I guess it kind of follows Courtney's comment about the way we relate to the buyers.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It was a question I was going to throw open to the group to see which ones you all prefer. I'm a bottom-up person, and I don't have a huge evidence for the effectiveness of the two alternates. But my intuition is that the top-down pressured approach can bring some short-term behavioural change that is not as sustainable as the bottom-up approach, because that bottom-up approach tends to try to address relationships and heart commitments that I think probably lead to longer-term behavioural changes, but I haven't got any evidence for it.
Yeah, the other thing, of course, is top-down. If you can actually help to impact the law, then that's absolutely phenomenal. And there are some organizations that's their whole dedication is to that. For example, in the UK, they're trying to introduce a Nordic approach to trafficking, which is about addressing demand rather than criminalizing the prostitute. And so that's definitely worth looking at and supporting those. As if they can get other organizations behind them, then that's all great. It's all well and good. Kathy, what were you going to say?
I was just going to ask a question about in your efforts of looking into school systems and stuff like that, did you find any like an age group of like what age was good to start at? Was it like teenagers, like giving them the information, like high school age, to give them information about this stuff that it's not necessarily the right thing to do, and maybe it's a family thing. It could be familiar, trafficking. So I was
Yeah.
just wondering if you got any good
Yeah, well,
response from it.
I actually think we need to start as soon as we can, as early as we can. So high school is the Sweetheart one that's aimed at high school children. But we have one that's aimed for younger children called Good Touch, Bad Touch. And so I know that it is controversial, but it depends on the way you know, the way you do it. So basically it's about talking to children about what's appropriate part of the body to touch. So we have a flip book, which is exactly that. And we've got that, we've been using that in Africa, in Asia. And it's been useful because people are happy to help to protect their children. But it really has to be used in conjunction with other stuff for adults at the same time, because otherwise, you know, you're putting all the responsibility on the kids, and that's not appropriate, really. You know, so but if you're working in a community, then having those, and these flip books are great because they're you know, you don't have to rely on electricity. You can teach this under a tree or in a classroom or in a clinic or anything, really. So they are really a good thing to use. Yeah.
Thank you. I did want to,
frankly, I think primary school children like reading books with their teacher, you know.
Agreed. I did want to, I saw a comment in the chat from Bishnu, he's in Nepal, and talking about supply chain using sex trafficking is in part due to poverty and unemployment in the situation. Like, how do we break or prevent this supply chain? I think, you know, the supply chain conversation is different when we're talking about developed versus developing countries.
Yeah,
and so any thoughts on that, or any other comments either from Bishnu or Glenn or
well, I think one of the things you can do is to do training with the border guards, because the challenge is that the border guards don't, then they're not, all they know is they've got to keep out people who, you know, undesirables out of the country, and they've got to welcome people who are from their own country. So if they can be trained on both sides of the border to look out for children, and then not assume that they're with their parents, for example, but ask questions, you know, and look at their ID and check to see things about them that you. But then there needs to be legal framework for them that backs that up, really, so that then the border guards can say you can't take this child, and we need to check on their background before you can take them anywhere else. So that's one thing, but I agree that it's really tough when you're talking about actual borders. It's really tough.
It seems to me that you have to pay attention to both the supply and the demand side, and that it requires a significant degree of cultural change. That what is causing people in the so-called developed world to invent the idea of a sex tourist holiday? And what cultural change can be made here in Australia that through peer pressure, through family pressure, lets young men know that it's not acceptable to go to Nepal or to Thailand or to Bali to pay for sex with quite likely younger people than they would find in Australia. How do we bring about that cultural change in both the supply and the demand side to say we have to honour our young girls and change people's attitudes to the idea of sex and the power imbalance that comes through that sort of tourism?
Yeah, there has been some efforts, for example, to have an on-flight video about buying, you know, you can buy this and you can buy this and you can buy this, and then suddenly it's a little girl and it's like, you can't buy this, and if you do, then in this country you'll be extradited to your own country and put in jail. So, but a lot, of course, you know, airlines don't want to do that if it's going to make their passengers uncomfortable. Another thing is to put half a leaflet in with people's tickets with the same information. You know, there are ways that you can do it. One of the things that has been done successfully in Cambodia is that in hotels they'll have they'll have a sign on the reception desk saying children won't be allowed in the rooms unless evidence is given that the child is, a child of the adult, rather, things like that. And and then doing training with tuk-tuk drivers, for example, so that they know not to, if someone wants to take a child from one place to another, that they're aware that children could be being trafficked. So all sorts of really great creative ideas if you look for them.
Yeah, I love that.
Sorry, can I just say, Nicole's got a project, and I'd love her to talk about it. She's been trying to talk, but she's not quite sure how to do the putting a hand up. So.
Yes, Nicole, please share.
Silly. I have so many years of Zoom. I figured it out now, but then
Good.
I was trying to also tell Courtney that I don't know if you're aware of Epic organization in the US. They do buyer interception. And it's really interesting because they have like the decoy ads, and then they enter into conversation with buyers. And I think they have almost over 500,000 conversations logged so far. So we're trying to do kind of a replication of that in Mexico, but the bot also sounds interesting.
Yeah, some are using TI as an outreach tool for that purpose, like to engage and have conversations. But it was developed for law enforcement, and so yeah. So we're using it both ways, but we're collecting data to see which is effective, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, with only about
Nicole,
5
you're
or
going to
so.
say, sorry, I just want Nicole.
Sorry, Glenn, what you want me to share? What the research we're trying to do?
Yes.
Okay. Really quickly, I'm working with Jared and with Glenn on some research. I did my master's thesis on buyers in Mexico. And I currently support some guys who are doing some outreach here in Mexico who have tried almost everything. They're doing the training that Glenn's talking about. They do online outreach. They do kind of a mobile coffee shop in the red light district where they talk to men and do kind of these rapid interventions where they put up questions and they ask them, and it kind of generates conversation. And we noticed that so much of it goes online that we actually found on Reddit, there are hundreds of thousands of threads of men who are buyers and looking to kind of talk to each other in a way that's safe, but it's public information. So it's available to the public, all these conversations. So we're trying to do a kind of a content analysis to see what are some of the motivations, what are some of the awareness factors they have as far as trafficking. When I did research with buyers, most of them were aware of trafficking and they knew what it was, but they never thought that they engaged in that because their indicator, when I asked them why, how are you sure that you never purchased sex from a victim? Their indicators were really exaggerated. They were like from the movies, if they were in chains, or they were just really vague, like, oh, I could just tell from her face, her facial expression, or my heart told me that she wasn't. So they really don't have a concept of really concrete indicators. So yeah, that's kind of some of the research I'm a little behind on, but we're trying to do an analysis of what are the reasons that they're looking for community. I think there's a lot of men seeking community with other men in a place where they won't be exposed, which is something that happened when we tried to do a group program with men, and they wouldn't do a group. They'd only do one-on-one counseling, and they wouldn't even come if we called it counseling. We had to change it to coaching because it sounded a little bit more manly. So there's like a lot of things to navigate when working with consumers, but we noticed that there are a lot of them who actually want to stop. I found a Reddit post of someone reaching out for help, asking to stop purchasing sex. So that's kind of the target population that we're trying to work with in our intervention programs.
That's
really
excellent.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love to hear more about that as you keep working on it. But we only have a couple minutes left, and any other comments, questions, or a takeaway? I know Matt has.
Yeah, I wonder if we spend the last couple of minutes giving everyone a chance just to say one sentence, no more than 20 seconds, about what stood out to you, what you want to go and read a bit more about, something you violently disagreed with.
You can either put it in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
I just want to say that Nicole's the thing that she's researching, that's amazing to me. And I really, I mean, to find out that on Reddit there's all these boards, I think that's very interesting. So I am definitely going to check that out and see what's going on with that. Thank you.
Yeah, because we talked about doing interviews, but I didn't really have that much time. But there was so much content on Reddit that I actually had to reduce it down to, I think, 3 years because the posts were so long, or there's so many, and the sub posts were up to 150 comments. So I don't know if it's the same in the States, because prostitution, I'm in Mexico and prostitution is not illegal here, but it could be an interesting source of information, knowledge, I guess.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I am new to this topic, so I appreciate everything that was said. But what I did like was using the strength of the perpetrators to change the behavior. That is key when it comes to it, because it's so negative. And I don't know if you guys could talk about, I know I have heard about the John School, but I don't know if it's good. Has it had good results? People ask me and I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think that this school that we're talking about or this program that we're talking about with the men in London, in Luton, is the opposite in a sense to, because John's School is really, like you say, it's not really good and it's negative, and basically they're being told all the problems, and I don't think personally I don't think it's very effective, but I can understand with police, you know, the way that police handle things is very black and white, isn't it? So they want, you know, they just think these are bad guys. But I think, you know, the whole thing of putting a group of guys together in a room and then, you know, telling them that they're bad boys isn't really going to have much effect, in my opinion. So doing the opposite, where you tell them, you know, you've got the strength to make this change possible, is much more positive.
Yeah, I liked Courtney's phrase that we should be trying to rehumanize the boys rather than shame them. I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, I just I appreciate coming together and, you know, having conversation about what's most up to date progress that we have on demand reduction strategies, because I always feel like I'm like do I still have my finger on it, or like, because there's so many, we talk about silos all the time. People are doing so many things that I'm constantly curious, like I got FOMO, okay, is what I'm saying. I have FOMO, and things like this help me know that I'm still a part of the game.
Yeah, I think that was helpful for me too, that I think Glenn mentioned a lot of like creative strategies. And what I'm taking away is that, usually when I think of demand reduction, it is like the John schools, changing laws, the public shaming, or, massive awareness campaigns, but it doesn't have to be that. And there's all of these different types of strategies or resources to use. And, you do have to get the buy-on from the, where you want to put, implement these creative strategies. But I just, appreciate that and thinking outside of the box. And it doesn't have to be the way that it always has been done. But anyone else want to share a takeaway before we wrap up? I know we're a couple minutes over.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this discussion. It's been great. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, well, Glenn, I saw that you put your email address in the chat.
Yes.
Matt, would also want to put your email address in the chat too, if anybody wanted to follow up with
yeah, please do.
any comments or questions. And then Glenn and Matt, I'll give it to you if you want to do any final parting words or a wrap up.
Yeah, one of the things I find that's quite is interesting is that actually the way that we work with victims, is trauma informed. We're working with them and we're saying, you can do it. And then actually, ironically, it's also the same strategy that we need to use it with the perpetrators. And I think many of them don't believe that change is possible on both sides of that equation. and it's having the hope with them that it is possible. I think going into it feeling a bit hopeless and feeling like, well, it's not really going to work, it's not going to change, it's been like this since the beginning of time, isn't helpful. So just keep feeling positive and believing that it is possible to change.
Completely agree. Thank you, Glenn. Any final words, Matthew?
I'd just like to talk very briefly about the supply chain ripple down effect that's intended, and whether that's ever going to be successful. I think it's our most significant new idea in the last half a dozen years that a couple of different countries are trying, and I don't think there's yet evidence of whether it's been successful or not. So that, I think, is the space to watch, to see whether we can use that top-down pressure to make supply chains safer or not.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Glenn and Matt, especially Matt, for staying up so late in Australia to help lead this dialogue. And thank you, everyone, for joining and your participation and your comments today. I think this was a really great discussion, and one that I think we could continue to have. And maybe this will be a topic we revisit in our 2025 dialogue. So thank you all for joining today. I'll follow up with information and the link later, but everyone have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next GAHTS meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Anna.